The words struck me like a slap across the face. From now on, that room will cost you $2,300 a month, Vanessa announced, her voice carrying over the clatter of dishes and the smell of roasted turkey. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. The Thanksgiving table had gone completely silent, forks suspended mid-air, my relatives staring at me with wide eyes. I felt the weight of every gaze, yet the only eyes I searched for were my son's. Mark kept his head bowed, studying his plate of mashed potatoes as though they could rescue him. I am Evelyn Carter, 69 years old, a widow and once a nurse at the county hospital. I had imagined this evening would bring me comfort, surrounded by family, remembering Robert, my husband, who served in the Navy and who I lost to cancer 3 years ago. Instead, I sat in my son's dining room trembling as his wife looked at me with a cold smile and demanded rent for the very roof I had once worked alongside Robert to buy. The cranberry sauce on my plate tasted like dust. I tried to steady my hands to keep the room from tilting, but anger and disbelief surged too quickly. "Excuse me?" I managed, though. My voice came out thinner than I intended. Vanessa dabbed her mouth with her napkin, perfectly calm, and repeated the figure as if she were offering me a bargain for the right to remain in what I had believed was a safe haven after Robert's death. I waited for Mark to intervene, to say something, anything, but his silence cut deeper than Vanessa's cruelty. Around the table, I caught Margaret's sharp intake of breath, a cousin's nervous cough, but no one moved to defend me. I was left staring at my son's wife while the walls of the house I thought of as ours suddenly felt like they were closing in. That night should have been about gratitude and family. Instead, it was the beginning of a... After everyone left the table that night, I sat alone in the small guest room upstairs, staring at the faded photograph of Robert in his Navy uniform. His steady eyes seemed to ask why I had allowed myself to end up here, silenced and humiliated. Memories of him have a way of rushing in at the hardest moments, reminding me of who I once was and what we built together. Robert and I had bought our first house back in 1984, a modest 2-story place in a quiet Ohio neighborhood. He came home from his service determined to give me and our children a life of stability, and for decades that house stood as the proof of our hard work. We raised Mark and his sisters, Anna and Claire, within those walls. We celebrated birthdays in the backyard, patched up scraped knees on the kitchen counter, and whispered our plans for the future long after the children had gone to bed. It was our kingdom, humble, but ours. When Robert's lungs failed him after years of fighting cancer, the silence of that house became unbearable. Every corner echoed with his absence. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me that I was alone. I tried to manage, I truly did, but evenings stretched like endless tunnels, and mornings felt hollow without him across the table. Mark's invitation had seemed like a lifeline. "Mom, just until you feel stronger," he'd said, placing his hand on mine. Vanessa smiled, then promising the kids would love having me close. I sold my furniture, gave away Robert's tools, and carried only what I could fit into their guest room. I told myself it was temporary, but deep down I craved the warmth of family again. For a while, it felt almost right. Sunday dinners together, helping the grandchildren with homework, Vanessa, chatting politely over coffee. I let myself believe I had found refuge, but refuge can turn into a cage when kindness begins to sour. The change didn't come all at once. At first, it was little things I brushed aside, convincing myself they didn't matter. Vanessa would sigh when she saw me folding laundry as if the extra load I created had become a burden. She started making offhand remarks about the water bill, sliding the statements onto the counter where I couldn't miss them. I tried to ignore it, telling myself she was under stress from work. She had recently been promoted at her firm, and with the bigger paycheck came bigger demands. New furniture arrived, then a remodel of the kitchen, followed by contractors tearing up the yard to install a deck. Each improvement was presented as an upgrade, a way of elevating their lifestyle. But somehow the guest room where I stayed remained untouched, shabby compared to the rest of the house, as if it had been left that way on purpose. The warmth in Vanessa's voice cooled. She no longer lingered over coffee with me, no longer asked about Robert or the old days. Instead, she addressed me with the kind of politeness you reserve for a stranger in line at the bank. And when the children ran into my arms after school, I noticed the way her smile tightened. "Go on. You need to focus on homework," she would say, pulling them away before I'd even had a chance to ask about their day. Mark's silence stung the most. He had always been my brave one, the boy who stood up to bullies in grade school, who promised me after Robert died that he'd look after me. Now he avoided my eyes when Vanessa's complaints filled the air. He let them hang unchallenged, his silence louder than any words. I began to wonder if the invitation to move in hadn't been an act of kindness at all, but a calculation. And if so, what exactly was the price I was expected to pay? One evening, while I was taking out the recycling, a glossy brochure slipped from the pile of magazines and landed at my feet. I bent down my hands, trembling before I even read the cover. Maplewood Senior Living Compassionate Care for Your Loved Ones. My breath caught. I turned the page and saw cheerful photographs of residents smiling in wheelchairs, a landscaped courtyard where men and women in their 80s sat under umbrellas. It wasn't just an advertisement. It was a plan. I slid the brochure back into the bin, praying it had been a mistake, but my chest ached with dread. Later that night, when I crept downstairs for a glass of water, I heard voices muffled behind Mark and Vanessa's bedroom door. "She contributes nothing," Vanessa whispered sharply. "We're spending money hand over fist while she just sits here. Do you want the kids' college funds to disappear? Because that's where this is headed." "She's my mother," Mark said, but the strength in his voice was barely a shadow. "And I'm your wife. We have our own family now. You can't keep letting her drain us." I stood frozen in the hallway, my fingers gripping the banister so tightly it hurt. Drain them, I bought my own groceries, paid for my prescriptions, never asked for a dime. But in Vanessa's story, I was a leech, an anchor weighing them down. When I finally climbed back to the guest room, my legs felt heavy, as though every step confirmed my new identity in this house, a burden. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the dark, and wondered when I had stopped being a mother and become an inconvenience. Thanksgiving was supposed to be a day of gratitude, a pause in the year to gather and remember what we still had. The table was full roasted turkey bowls of stuffing sweet potatoes, topped with marshmallows, gravy steaming in its porcelain dish. Laughter had filled the air only moments earlier as the children argued over who would get the drumsticks. Then Vanessa's voice cut through it all like a knife. $2,300 a month, she said, looking directly at me. That's what it costs to stay here. Below market rate, actually. I'm being generous. The clink of a dropped fork rang louder than it should have. Margaret, my daughter-in-law's sister, gasped. "Vanessa, that's fair," Vanessa snapped back, dabbing her lips as if she were talking about nothing more serious than a grocery bill. I stared at her, the taste of cranberry still on my tongue, now bitter. "I buy my own food. I cover my prescriptions," I managed. She waved her hand dismissively. "Groceries. Pills. What about utilities, insurance, the taxes on this place? Do you think we can just keep carrying you forever?" I felt every eye turn toward me. My chest tightened, and I turned to Mark, desperate for him to speak. He shifted in his chair, shame flickering across his face, but no words came. His silence was worse than her cruelty. The children looked confused, their forks hovering in the air. Little Sophie whispered, "Why is Grandma crying? I hadn't even realized I was." The room felt unbearably small. My hands shook as I pushed back my chair. "Excuse me," I said softly, rising on unsteady legs. "Sit down." Vanessa ordered, her voice sharp, but I didn't. I walked to the guest room and closed the door, leaving the sound of muffled arguments and clinking glasses behind me. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke to a sharp knock on my door. When I opened it, Vanessa stood there in a tailored blouse, her smile tight as glass. In her hands was a stack of papers clipped neatly together. "I've drawn up an agreement," she said, stepping into the room without being invited. She spread the pages across my dresser like a dealer laying out cards. $2,300 a month due on the 1st. Security deposit waived because you're family. See, I'm being generous. I picked up the first page. Each line was another insult. No overnight guests without approval, no use of the kitchen past 8 p.m., no access to the living room during family time, a curfew 9 o'clock sharp. "This is a joke," I whispered. "This is reality," she countered, her eyes gleaming. "You've had a free ride long enough. Time to contribute." I swallowed hard. "And if I refuse, then you'll need to vacate by the 1st of next month. I've already spoken to a moving company. 3 hours and they'll have you packed. Very efficient." She pulled her phone from her pocket, flashing me the name of a facility on the screen. "Maplewood Senior Living has a room waiting. Medicare covers most of it." Her voice was syrupy sweet, but the threat behind it was sharp as steel. I pressed my hands against the dresser to steady myself, my eyes falling on the small wooden box I kept tucked underneath. Inside were the papers Robert had insisted we save. Documentation is protection, he'd always said. At the time, I thought it was just his habit of order. Now I understood it might be the only thing standing between me and the streets. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, I pulled the wooden box from beneath my bed. My fingers hesitated over the combination our wedding anniversary before turning the lock. Inside lay Robert's careful folders labeled in his steady handwriting, insurance, military records, medical files. At the very bottom, I found the one I'd been searching for: property. The deed was crisp despite its age, the ink bold against the page. Robert Allen Carter and Evelyn Marie Carter, it read. Paid in full, recorded more than a decade ago. Robert's handwriting trailed in the margin. "This is yours, Evie. Always. Don't let anyone take it from you." Tears blurred my vision. For the first time in months, I felt his presence close, guiding me. But grief gave way to resolve. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't some guest who could be evicted at will. This was my house. The next morning, I drove across town to see Harold Stevens, the attorney who had handled Robert's affairs. His office smelled of old books and leather, familiar and steadying. I handed him the deed with shaking hands. He adjusted his glasses, studied the paper, and nodded. "Mrs. Carter, this property is clear. Title is in your name alone since Robert's passing. There's no mortgage, no lien." Relief coursed through me, but his expression darkened as he shuffled through additional papers. "But there's something else. Applications for credit cards, home equity loans. These bear your signature, yet they aren't yours, are they?" My stomach turned. I shook my head, horrified. He leaned back, his voice firm. "Then someone has been forging documents in your name. That's fraud, Evelyn, and it looks calculated." I gripped the arms of the chair, anger rising to match my fear. Vanessa hadn't just insulted me, she'd been planning to erase me entirely. On the first Saturday after Thanksgiving, a knock rattled my bedroom door before the sun was even up. When I opened it, 2 men in matching polo shirts stood beside Vanessa, who held a clipboard like she was running the show. "Swift movers," she announced brightly. "Here to help you pack. We'll have you settled at Maplewood by dinner time." The men shifted uneasily, glancing at me, as if they knew something wasn't right. "I haven't agreed to move," I said, my voice calm though my hands trembled. "You also haven't agreed to pay rent," Vanessa replied smoothly, stepping into the room. "So it's time. We can do this the easy way, Evelyn, or the hard way." I reached for the folder I had placed on the nightstand. My heart beat steady as I laid the deed flat on top of her clipboard. "Actually, this house belongs to me. Paid off years ago. My name is the only one on the title." For a moment, her confident smile faltered. "That's ridiculous. We've been paying the mortgage for years." "What mortgage?" I unfolded the second document. Harold had given me a copy of a fraudulent loan application. "This signature looks like mine, but it isn't. My attorney has already confirmed it as forgery." The movers exchanged glances, muttered something about waiting outside, and disappeared down the hall. Vanessa's face tightened. "You're confused. This is exactly why you need professional care." "No, Vanessa. The only confusion was thinking I couldn't see through you. I picked up my phone. My attorney is waiting for my call. The next step is the police unless you leave this house now. Her mask cracked, fury flashing across her face. She spun toward the door, shouting for Mark, but I stood taller than I had in years. This was my home, and I wasn't leaving. By Monday morning, Harold had already filed the paperwork. Fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. The words looked stark in black ink, but they carried the weight of justice. He told me the district attorney's office was interested, especially because crimes against seniors had become a public focus. That afternoon, 2 detectives visited the house. They asked questions, gently recording my answers while I handed over the forged loan applications and credit card statements Harold had uncovered. One detective whistled low under his breath as he flipped through the documents. "This is serious, ma'am. Whoever did this wasn't sloppy. They knew exactly what they were trying to pull." Vanessa's face blanched when she saw the police at the door. She tried to twist her story, claiming I was confused, that she had power of attorney, that I was imagining things. But Harold was ready. He produced my medical records and testimony from neighbors who had seen me managing perfectly well. Every lie she spoke only dug the hole deeper. Mark stood behind her, pale and silent. When the detectives finally asked him if he'd known about the loans, he muttered something about just following her lead. The shame on his face was plain, but shame doesn't erase betrayal. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Dorothy from next door stopped me at the mailbox, her eyes wide. We saw the squad car, Evelyn. "Are you all right?" "I'm better than all right," I told her. "I'm fighting back." By evening, whispers had become a chorus. People who once smiled politely now shook their heads when Vanessa's name came up. Mark avoided going outside, slipping to his car with his head down. For years, I had felt invisible, but now the truth was visible to everyone, and it was finally on my side. The trial began in early spring, the courthouse filled with reporters and curious neighbors who had followed every twist of the case. I sat in the witness box, my hands steady on the wooden rail as I told 12 strangers how my son's wife had tried to turn me into a tenant in my own home. Vanessa sat at the defense table, her hair perfectly styled, her suit immaculate, but her eyes burned with cold fury. Her attorney tried to paint me as a bitter widow, jealous of a younger woman's success. I looked straight at the jury and said, "Success built on lies isn't success. It's theft dressed in designer clothes." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, and I knew the jury understood. When Mark took the stand, he crumbled. His voice broke as he insisted he hadn't known the full extent that Vanessa had pressured him. But under cross-examination, his excuses fell apart. He admitted seeing the loan documents, admitted knowing credit cards had been opened in my name, admitted choosing silence because it was easier. The boy who once promised to protect me stood exposed as a man who betrayed me with cowardice. The verdict was swift. Vanessa guilty on all counts: fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, 5 years in prison. Mark guilty as an accomplice, sentenced to probation and restitution, his career in ruins. As the gavel struck, a wave of relief mixed with grief washed over me. Justice had been served, yet I had lost my son. Afterward, Mark tried to catch my eye as deputies led Vanessa away. His lips formed the words, "I'm sorry." I turned from him. Sorry couldn't erase the nights I cried alone or the silence that hurt worse than cruelty. Some betrayals carve lines too deep to ever be healed. Spring melted into summer, and the house felt different, lighter, as though the walls themselves had exhaled. The renovations Vanessa once flaunted now belonged wholly to me. I cooked in the gleaming kitchen without needing anyone's permission, swam laps in the pool she had insisted on, and felt a quiet satisfaction knowing every corner had been reclaimed. Neighbors stopped by often. Dorothy brought fresh pies. Margaret came with groceries, and soon the loneliness that had weighed me down was replaced by laughter and companionship. I even started volunteering at the senior center, teaching others how to guard their finances, how to trust but verify. Documentation is protection, I would tell them, repeating Robert's words. They called me their warrior, though I never felt like one, only a woman who had finally remembered her worth. Anna visited first tentative but genuine, apologizing for not believing me sooner. We cooked together, her peeling apples while I rolled pie dough, the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon. Weeks later, Claire arrived with her children, their laughter echoing across the yard. For the first time in years, the house felt alive again. Mark wrote letters from probation, long apologies filled with explanations. I read them but did not respond. When he called, I answered only once. "I forgive you," I told him, "but forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. The mother you betrayed no longer exists. I am someone new now." There was silence on the line, then quiet sobbing, but I felt nothing beyond the steady strength of my decision. On the anniversary of Robert's passing, I stood by his grave with fresh flowers. "I kept it safe, Rob," I whispered. "The house, our life's work, it's still ours." A breeze stirred the flag by his marker, and I almost heard his laugh. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset bleed gold across the sky. For the first time since his death, I felt at home in every sense of the word. Not because of the house itself, but because I had reclaimed myself within it.